Along the northwest coast of America, in Pacific County, Washington, there exists a remarkable confluence of land, river, and ocean. A rare mingling of fresh and salt water, a rich breeding ground for aquatic life, an area of pristine natural beauty and unpolluted splendor. A unique place where both wild species and humans live together in a delicate balance. An estuary called Willapa Bay. Representing a mere 2% of the world's total surface, estuaries are nonetheless enormously productive areas. These nurseries of the ocean provide refuge and food for scores of aquatic creatures as they begin their life cycles.
Estuaries are places where the tide comes in and the tide goes out. The salinity changes all the time, the temperature changes all the time, the nutrient loading in the water changes all the time. Estuaries, by their very nature, are very rich areas for nutrients, and consequently they're very rich nursery grounds for many fish, for crab, for clams, for all sorts of animals that may spend their lives, most of their adult lives, offshore.
Willapa Bay is the largest unpolluted estuary in the United States, stretching some 25 miles long by 6 miles wide. The water here is generally shallow, usually just a few feet deep. At low tide, half of the bay floor is often exposed, revealing mudflats, sand spits, and islands.
Willapa Bay is undeniably the cleanest estuary still remaining on the entire U.S. coast.
We're told that our bay is probably the top bay in the nation as far as the quality, and our effort is to keep it that way, and I think we can improve on it.
The bay is bounded by the Long Beach Peninsula on the west, the Columbia River to the south, and Cape Shoalwater to the north. It drains all of Pacific County, over 600 square miles of watershed through 20 river systems. The surrounding geography includes both fresh and saltwater marshlands, diked grasslands, densely forested uplands, tidal flats, and sand dunes. This fertile yet fragile environment is home to a remarkable diversity of wildlife. Besides plentiful marine species, it supports thousands of land mammals and harbor seals and hundreds of thousands of migratory birds. 5,000-acre Long Island, part of the Willapa National Wildlife Refuge, rises up at the southern portion of the bay. It contains the largest remaining ancient western red cedar forest in the world.
It's believed to be the last timber type and vegetation type of its kind anywhere in the world. On the island, it's such a unique resource in terms of the mosaic of timber types that we have over there. We have everything from recent clear cuts to a forest type that has remained unchanged basically for several thousand years.
For hundreds of years, Willapa Bay has attracted humans in search of food and other natural resources.
Many tribes came down to the ocean and to the waters to harvest the seafoods, to pick the reeds to make their baskets and do all that sort of thing.
During the California Gold Rush of 1849, Willapa Bay oysters were shipped to San Francisco, where they fetched $1 apiece. By 1854, the center of the booming oyster industry and new capital of Pacific County was a town called, appropriately enough, Oysterville. In 1889, a narrow-gauge railway became the main transportation route on the peninsula. Operating until 1930, it hauled the mainstays of Pacific County's economy to market: lumber, cranberries, oysters, and seafood.
So over the last 100 years, the techniques and technologies around those industries may have changed substantially, but the basic resources themselves are pretty much the same as they were a century ago.
Today, the entire economy of Pacific County is just as dependent on a clean estuary and the natural resources surrounding it as it ever was. Literally everyone in the county either affects or is affected by what goes on in and around Willapa Bay.
Well, I fish for salmon, which we're doing now, and sturgeon and dog salmon out here in the bay, gill netting. And I crab fish in the winter and bring in the Dungeness. And then in the spring, I own a clam farm on Long Island, and I dig little steamer clams.
clear back in the late 1800s, they had logging here. This particular piece was logged in 1909. There was a railroad that went up the valley, and they had a pond down here that they loaded logs out of. As far as the importance to the economy, I would say that without the logging industry in Pacific County, it'd dry up and blow away.
The Willapa grows more oysters than any place in the world. It's very unique to the state of Washington that we can own our own subtidal land. We own our own bottoms just like you would own your lawn or you'd own your potato patch or your cornfield, and we plant it just like a farmer plants it. It's marked, planted, they have grown for 3 to 4 years, harvested, crops are rotated.
In dairy operations, we do have large concentrations of animals, more than they used to in the past. I think one thing we're seeing in the dairy industry is an increase in number of animals in a given operation versus the number of operations.
All of cranberry bogs in our area, the West Coast or state of Washington, are on peat bogs, and they're also close to the ocean. So it's kind of an ideal climate for cranberries, and the fact that native cranberries are found in peat bogs or places where it remains wet. But we do need fresh, good, clean water for irrigation and for frost protection.
Another great economic resource is tourism. Historically, the Long Beach Peninsula has been a very popular tourist destination area since the late 1800s.
I can't think of anything place I'd rather be than here, where you can enjoy what God has given us and realize the peace and tranquility that goes with it. You know, we don't have a single stop sign in Tokeland.
Because of the small population and the absence of commercial shipping traffic, Willapa Bay is still relatively unpolluted.
We've not had any problems that we know of. Everything here in terms of wildlife populations has been really healthy.
The oyster is the canary of the mine shaft. If something is wrong with the oyster, there's something wrong with the bay.
Oysters are very delicate. The biggest problem could be pollution. Fortunately, in Willapa Bay, we don't have that problem yet.
But in this modern technological age, the potential for pollution exists seemingly everywhere.
What comes out of the watershed into the bay goes out into the ocean. That's one of the ways they're interconnected. So if you have pollution coming down out of your watershed into the estuary, it will go out into the ocean.
There are several sources of non-point pollution here in the Willapa Valley, from the large commercial dairy operation, the small landowners with their small acreage and large number of animals, residential, large herds of wildlife that exist here in the valley, and also forestry practices can add into that problem of non-point pollution.
To protect this delicate ecosystem, the industries, businesses, citizens, and government of Pacific County are taking action. The goal is to reduce pollution right at its source and maintain the purity of the bay.
It's going to require careful stewardship of our resources here. I think it's very important that Pacific County maintains at least the level of environmental quality that it now has, if it doesn't improve the quality.
In recent years, the forest industry has taken steps to minimize sedimentation on streams that are tributaries to Willapa Bay. These are having a positive effect on the fish and shellfish industries. Trees must be replanted within 3 years of harvest. Uncut buffer zones are now mandated around wetlands, the bayshore, riverbanks, and protected habitats like eagles' nests.
Temperature control along the creeks are very important and to hold the temperature of the water for fish and so on. We were required to leave 25 feet on each side of this Class 3 stream at that time.
Agricultural chemical use is commonplace today. Fertilizers and pesticides help produce bigger, better, less disease-prone crops of timber, cranberries, and oysters. Yet the possible impact of these substances on the bay is a matter of concern.
There's a lot of good that's come from the environmental concerns about pesticides because it's made every person in agriculture more aware of what they're doing. We are a part of something called integrated pest management, the use of biological ways of controlling insects along with chemical and cultural ways. And it's the combination of these different methods, whereas in the past, many people relied strictly on chemicals.
The beauty of Pacific County is ushering in a residential development boom along with an accompanying increase in tourism. But with this development comes perhaps the greatest immediate pollution threat to Willapa Bay: coliform bacteria. This contamination from point sources, such as sewage treatment plants, boats and houseboats, and non-point sources, such as wildlife, livestock, and septic tanks, can quickly spell disaster for the local economy if it migrates into the bay.
The problem, though, with the tourism business is, well, we'll have to watch the development of more motels, restaurants, second home dwellings. And the problem there, of course, is what happens to the sewage. Probably the safest alternative environmentally is also the greatest capital cost, and that is development of a peninsula-wide, as well as up here in the North County, a development of sewer treatment plants. Another good alternative would just be simply to require larger lots for development.
The State Department of Health has a shellfish section that routinely tests oysters and tests water in which the oysters are grown, and they have a fecal coliform standard, and if that standard is exceeded on a routine basis, an area can be decertified for growing and harvesting.
Our biggest concern is losing the quality of the water through human contamination. There's room for human development around the bay if the sewage is handled correctly, if the septic tanks are handled correctly.
The potential problem we run into is without some type of long-term storage, a dairy operator would have to apply his animal waste onto the fields during a real wet periods of the season. These particular ponds are a system to store waste for 6 months and then apply the waste at a suitable time during the summer months, when both you get an improvement in water quality by not applying animal waste to the ground when it's saturated, and also applying the animal waste when the plants can utilize the fertilizer value of that material.
I imagine this farm was started in the early 1900s, like a lot of this area here. It's common practice in those days to allow your animals your cattle or sheep or horses to cross the stream beds. The problem with having the barn close to the creek is it increases the potential for water pollution through barnyard runoff, and I've proposed changing the channel to get a green belt between the barnyard and the creek channel itself. And we're working on an animal waste lagoon as well as changing the creek channel. We've put in a culvert last spring to allow the cows to go over the creek rather than through it. And that also means fencing along the stream beds and creek channel itself to keep the cattle from going into the creek.
I think the landowners are seeing that, sure, it's a water quality benefit, but there are several other benefits that they need to weigh that they may be getting out of a system like this, much more than they have in the past.
The spread of Spartina cordgrass occurring in salt marshes and tidelands is another disturbing development. Currently, over 2,500 acres are affected. Yet there is a potential for more than 30,000 acres to yield to this aggressive plant.
Spartina is native to the east coast of the United States, and it came here accidentally a number of years ago, almost 100 years ago. The reason it's threatening this estuary is not because it's in and of itself toxic. It's because it does two things. First of all, it physically displaces whatever else grows here naturally and natively. The more serious problem is that we're directly going to lose habitat for juvenile Dungeness crabs and for hardshell clams and for a number of fish species that use the intertidal as part of their life cycle. The grass, as you can see right now, is growing in pretty scattered little patches, and yet at the rate we see it seeding right now, we know within 20 or 30 years that almost all the open ground we see right now will be covered with Spartina. Personally, I think what needs to be done is we need to eradicate it if we want to keep the diversity and the stability in the bay. It's going to radically change the ecosystem.
For Willapa Bay to remain the largest unpolluted estuary in America will take the efforts of everyone in Pacific County. A recently formed Citizens Advisory Council is implementing a management plan that will assure water quality in the bay for generations to come.
We're all stewards of the land, stewards of the water. If we don't take care of it and if we don't worry about our neighbor, then our whole economy is in trouble. And we have a very good working relationship with the Oysterman, with the fishermen, with the timber people, with tourism.
There's room for a good deal of development. We can coexist quite nicely.
The future of our local communities really lies in the hands of the local people. I think they have a great opportunity to help determine which way their communities can go.
With a population of just 18,000, Pacific County is a remarkably diverse community. It's always been that way. Just as the winds and currents have constantly reshaped the bay, new problems, both natural and man-made, will continue to impact the county.
We live in a very delicate balance between the environment, between air, clean water, sand, and low-lying areas, wetlands. And it would be a shame to do anything that would destroy them or contaminate them.
For the future, if we can control the environment, if we can control pollution, I think there's a bright future. I hope there is. I have a 17-year-old son that I hope will be fifth generation.
We've been fishing in Willapa Bay for 4 generations now, and I would really like to see it continue. My brother and I both still fish, and my dad and my granddad, and on and on. And I would like to see my kids be able to fish too.
If you want peace and tranquility, and you enjoy the beauty of nature, you enjoy the water, and you love the birds, this would be the place to come.
There is a certain honor in being responsible for a rare national treasure, a feeling of pride in nurturing, harvesting, and protecting it for future generations, so they too may find a livelihood, a community, and a sense of wonder in the eternal rhythms and delicate balance of an estuary called Willapa Bay.